This is TWiT.
You talked a little bit earlier about financial maximization, and that's, I think, one of the key components of this book. That is the overarching essence of what you're talking about, where we are right now and potentially where we would be best to kind of move away from. What happens if we don't shift away from this mentality, this world of financial maximization that we are so surrounded by right now?
Well, if we continue to operate according to the belief that financial value is the only rational value, and that if we simply just build a large enough wealth base that we can solve everything, I think that's a world without many jobs, because I think that encourages a mindset of automation. I think that's a world where we try to solve the challenges created by automation just by throwing money at it, which is what I think the universal basic income is. Of course, the solution in an age where we think money is the most important thing that matters, the answer is to give away money. And so I think that it produces an incredible wealth, prosperity, and a total famine. And I think in everything else, an ecological famine, a social, relational famine, a purpose famine, to me, it's not a coincidence that of the world's 10 largest economies, 5 or 6, I believe, have been stricken with a populist uprising in the last 5 years, right? It's the world's richest countries that are experiencing this, right? And it's not a coincidence. It's because it's called the Gini coefficient is how economists will talk about it. But the degree of inequality that exists inside of a nation state will reach a point where it breaks. This is what's happened in Chile this past week, where people burned down the power building for the country. And so that's what happens if this stuff doesn't get stopped. Like, rich people will screw themselves with this short-sightedness. The crazy thing about our economic policy since the 1970s is that if we just followed our previous trajectory, we would have a government that was amply funded. We would have an education system that was well-funded. Rich people would still be rich, just slightly less rich. We probably wouldn't have the environmental decay that we have now. It's a lot of own goals that we've been creating, all to basically squeeze out another 20% of profits each quarter. And I think that's really what we're getting. We're getting like another 20% of income through this mentality than we would have otherwise. And so to me, European societies that offer a stronger social safety net, to me, that is a clearly more advanced way of thinking about this. There you're just using taxes as a means to redistribute those profits to pay for social services that reduce the need for people to spend money on those things, and therefore making them wealthier, even if it's not through financial wealth, but it's just by making sure that people are educated and are in a strong society. But yeah, I mean, we are, we're heading off a cliff now. If I write in the book about a 30-year theory of change. I believe that 30 years is the right timeline to change anything. Like, exercise as a hobby went from not existing to being super common in 30 years. Like, exercise is still a new thing, as weird as it is to imagine.
That is weird to imagine, yes.
In a modern context, it's still a new thing. In 1967, Strom Thurmond was arrested for jogging in South Carolina because it was so weird to run outside. That was 1967. So, like, these things are newer than we think. The challenge is the climate crisis. We don't have 30 years there. We have maybe 10 years. And so that's going to accelerate our need to evolve. Now, maybe that's the forcing function that reveals that the need for us to elevate new values, that, like, reducing the amount of carbon parts per millimeter, CO2 per millimeter in the atmosphere should be the most important value we're all working off of. Getting that from, it's now 405, getting that back down to 350, where Earth is livable. Maybe that's what emerges. But yeah, on our current trajectory, there's just going to be a small amount of really rich people and then a lot of despair. It's Elysium. It's that sci-fi movie, and that's the path we're on. And I think that's the path that the powers at B are okay with. Yeah. I don't think they mind that, because they think they still win in that scenario.
Sure.
But all the rest of us should be saying, hold up. Well, like, when did we decide that's the outcome?
Yeah, and in the book you point out, you refer to, Gen Z and millennials being instrumental to this, right? Like, the 30-year time span with Gen Z and millennials, they're going to be the ones in power in 30 years. And so are the concepts in this book, I mean, I'm sure the concepts in this book are aimed for anyone who's willing to listen and read and learn from them. But do you think that they maybe resonate more with those generations versus the kind of the boomers and that are so deeply entrenched with this way of thinking right now that it's really hard to reverse the course? Yet you have Gen Z, millennials, these younger generations realizing what you're talking about as far as, the climate is concerned and the need for change right now and not to just put it off until later.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's always easier to solve your friend's problems than your own, right?
Yeah, for sure.
When change requires unwanted change within yourself, we resist it, And so, I mean, in 1990, many of the issues that we're talking about didn't really exist, right? It had barely started happening, and so that 1990 was Guns N' Roses ago. That's 30 years ago. That's Guns N' Roses ago.
Yeah.
And that's when all of this has happened.
Yep.
Like the majority of CO2 that's in the atmosphere right now, that has happened since that point. It has been just us. Just us. There's no bad guy other than us. Like the brilliance of Extinction Rebellion is that they are a post-blame, post-shame, nonviolent organization trying to change this, because it's like it was us that's doing this and are still doing this. And so someone like Greta Thunberg, she has the gift of a mind that lets her see very clearly. And she's born at a time where she can really see the world for where it is, partially because she didn't create it, right? So she can more honestly see the reality of it. And so I look at her as she is seeing a truth that the rest of us are still waking up to. But it's coming a lot sooner than we believe. I mean, I'm a deep believer in Extinction Rebellion and a nonviolent movement to try to stop this, because we're currently on a path towards almost certain inevitable violence as the effects of climate change just wreck their course across the world. And so the idea of people sacrificing themselves to try to, in a nonviolent way, to stop this now, I believe, is like the most compassionate thing you could do. Like the last thing we should do is to just give up. Mm-hmm. It's just to accept this and say, oh, there's nothing we could do. After for 30 years, we just ignored. And now we say, oh, no, but there's nothing we could have done. It is, our ancestors deserve better, and our children deserve better. And it's shameful if we continue to avoid taking responsibility for our own actions.
Yeah, when you talk about Guns N' Roses ago, I love that phrase. I go back a few more decades to, you wrote about Milton Friedman's New York Times op-ed in the 1970s and how that captivated so many, and how to a large degree that kind of paved the way for the mentality that we are in right now. Why was it so captivating to people at the time?
It was in 1970, Milton Friedman wrote an essay arguing that businesses have no social responsibility other than maximizing profits. And, it's a powerful and simple argument. It's like a hot take. It's a
totally
hot take a super hot take. And the economy ran into trouble right after that. It ran into trouble because of the cost of Vietnam War, the cost of the Cold War, and then the cost of the social programs that LBJ put in. And so the economy ran out of room there. And so the whole economic model shifted. Like, this is the same moment where the U.S. moved away from the Bretton Woods Agreement and the gold standard, and where basically the United States' strategy of governance just became financial growth, because the country started to become run on debt. And so you can only work running on debt as long as you're just keep making more money the following year, so you can keep paying back the previous year's debt. So there was like a certain moment where he got put on that course. It was just a moment where I think there was a softness and an uncertainty, a belief that the way things were working was no longer working. And here was someone that had like a powerful and effective idea. And people went with it. And in large ways, I think we're still playing on these old playbooks, Friedman's playbook, the game theory playbook, certain notions of human relatedness that are very deep, that we believe very deeply, that maybe we shouldn't. Even something like the effect that the Stanford prison experiment has had on the popular imagination, when now we kind of find out that that's not even true, right? Like that study was actually kind of faked, apparently. And so I feel like we need models that are looking at what works about now, because there's a lot of things that are amazing about the world today. I mean, look at what we've achieved in the pursuit of financial growth. Like, it's truly extraordinary. I'm kind of in awe of human achievement. So what can we do if we're steered towards a goal that makes a little bit more sense than just making as much money for myself as quickly as possible, which is kind of the mindset now that just isn't going to work.